Hello all, my name is Anna Marie, and in the beginning of 2020, I decided to start a garden. And if you asked me about my garden, offhand, why I started it in the last year, I called it my depression garden, because to be honest, that's why I started it. The year 2020 has been incredibly hard for most people. The year before 2020 marked the hardest year that I've had so far of my life, and so going into the pandemic, everything still felt kind of numb from that. And it was easy to not really feel anything because I had already been so numbed by all the repeated loss of loved ones and loss of things in my life in the year before that it didn't really register the same as maybe it was for some people. It's like, I got through this last year, I'm gonna be okay. And then we kept being okay and we kept trying, but I plan to start my garden even before pandemic hit, which is hard to believe looking back now. I decided probably mid-December of 2019 into January of 2020 when I didn't know what to do with myself anymore. Nothing made sense. I had lost a relationship. I had a really traumatic life experience with my body, emotionally and physically, and I just didn't really know who I was anymore. I felt like a shell of a person, and I needed something to throw myself into. And I threw myself into gardening and finding gardening channels and resources. And even before I had a garden, I was just watching and consuming as much as I could because it was something that seemed worth learning about when I needed a distraction. Wasn't sleeping at 2 a.m., might as well be doing something with it. My brain isn't functioning enough to do anything school or work related, and it was something to focus on. So I started my journey. And I started my seed collection, which, if anyone asks you, there are two distinct hobbies within gardening. There's planting seeds in the ground and there is collecting seeds. And I like to think that I've acquired both in the last year and not just the collecting seeds part. I've become really invested in heirloom seeds and our food system as a whole, evaluating that and looking at our networks of support when it comes to food and product development, and looking at how we can help our community grow in a more sustainable way moving forward. Regenerative agriculture, permaculture, all those different things. Permaculture is a little more strict than I would like to consider my principles, but I think regenerative agriculture is really something that we need to be looking at, and it starts with supporting our farmers that are closest to us, that are doing things that we believe in. So it wasn't just about learning how to plant seeds successfully and make things come into the house. It was really about reevaluating the way that we consume and obtain food as a system, as a society, as a local community, pathways of access to food. Considering food deserts has always been something that I'm really passionate about, and being someone with dietary restrictions medically, having celiac disease and multiple allergies, I often think about those that are in food deserts and only have convenience stores and all that. If you have a peanut allergy, if you are in a situation where you're picking food up from a shelter, you're in an evacuation zone. I mean, this year in California, as well as many years before, but especially at the beginning of this year, just having fire after fire after fire, evacuation after evacuation, followed by 2018 with all the flooding and the fires all hitting at once. There were so many displaced populations in that period of time, just like there was several places in the country and beyond. And it's like, people in those situations don't have the resources to be picky, but what if you are medically deemed to be picky? And even just when we look at food stamps and CalFresh and EBT and just the movements that are going to that to support our local farmers with their programs and initiatives, working with farmers markets specifically to get people using their EBT dollars, their government food supported dollars, not at the convenience stores, not on Red Bull, not on Gatorade, but giving it back to our farmers in local communities and giving them access to be able to use those dollars and funds within our local food economy, which I think has been really, really powerful. I wrote an article on it that was not published, but I'm considering publishing now because I do think it's really good work. There's multiple farms around me in the part of California that I'm in that are doing really good work as far as providing free food stands, community initiatives, teaching people how to garden. Yisrael Family Farms in Sacramento is, has one of my favorite slogans, using the hood for good, teaching kids in impoverished communities how to grow their own food and take their food availability into their own hands, which I think is such a powerful resource. And the garden this year has given me back so much more than I expected from it. And not only just learning to care about and take note of our food economy and learning how I play a part in that cycle and how I want to continue to contribute more to it, is obviously the emotional effect that even with the craziness of this year and even how broken I felt and how shallow of a person I felt at the beginning of this year and the beginning of this process, I realized that every time I went outside, I noticed that something was still working. Nature and the seasons move forward whether we want them to or not. Whether there is a global pandemic, spring will always turn to summer, summer will always turn to autumn, and that's something we can count on. Even with fluctuations and swings and unexpected changes and fires and all these hurricanes and earthquakes, the seasons still change. And no matter what, I continue to be fascinated every time I put a seed into soil and it sprouted. And it gave me something to watch grow. Sometimes in a failing manner, but something was still working. Something still moved forward. No matter how much we feel we are stuck or broken, something still works every time. And I think there's something really powerful in that lesson in learning how to grow food, is that something's still working. And I think that's really powerful. And it's helped me a lot. There were days when it took everything to even get out of my bed to go into the garden. Just to go outside. It gave me a reason to go outside and to get out of bed. To put on my boots and open the greenhouse, take a walk through the garden. No matter how short or how simple it may seem, that simple action of getting up, of having something to tend to, was really powerful when I thought that I had lost that aspect of being able to tend to something. You form a relationship with the earth, you form a relationship with cycles and patterns, taking environmental cues, being able to learn and pay attention in a different way than you maybe had the opportunity or reason to before. And there were so many times where I looked at the garden and said, nothing is growing. I feel like I've completely failed. And without failure, there was always something that caught my amazement at the same time. Flowers that I had completely looked over, something was growing. I just didn't care to see that. I chose to see everything that was failing, that I hadn't learned how to do properly yet, the things that, the smoke and the ash literally killed, which was beyond my control. But something was still growing, and there was still bees that would finally come back and were in the garden, and I would just sit and watch them. And I remember being in the garden one day and I was looking at my beans that were half dead, but I noticed that at the very top there was blossoms again. even in the peak heat when they shouldn't have been producing, there's blossoms. And when I stood there for a minute, there's a hummingbird. And it's something so simple and it seems so easy, but it's something that if I wasn't gardening, I wouldn't have paid attention to. I wouldn't have paid attention to the 10-day forecast, not just to know what to wear to school, but to know when I needed to pull certain plants out, when I knew to cover certain things, when I knew if I could count on all of my tomatoes dropping their flowers or if I could count on them to actually produce food. And it was just a whole new level of acknowledging the bounty and the complexity of the earth and Mother Nature and everything that it's trying to communicate, and we just might not be listening. So it gave me a new appreciation for the earth and phytonutrients and micronutrients and many, many other things. And along the way, even when I felt like relationships in my own life were not where I wanted them to be, I discovered a whole community of people that are ridiculously nice, for the most part. Good people. Gardeners are good people. Even if you disagree with them, even if you completely have no connection with any other aspect of their life, you're all fighting for something similar. And maybe this is just people that are aiming to homestead, no matter how small the scale, whether they're in an apartment or they're on a small plot of land or they're on 50 acres and have, horses and pigs and a dairy cow and all sorts of other things and goats and chickens, or whether they're just growing on their balcony and learning how to dehydrate from and can from things they buy at the farmer's market. We're all at our own places in life, but if we're going towards that aspect of learning how to make things a little bit more simple again by learning those root skills that we've kind of lost sight of because we go to a grocery store and pick things off the shelves and go home and we don't really think twice about it. The people that are trying to think twice and make a difference in at least how they feed their family and what they're putting into their own body, there's a certain type of person in that, regardless of what your beliefs are. And when you're on that gardening page on Facebook, or you're talking to someone across the fence, or a neighbor stops by and asks you about your garden every other day when they're on their walk, that's a connection that I wouldn't have had otherwise. I formed an amazing relationship with my neighbors that I hadn't had before, all because they had been growing food. And it gave us something to talk about. And we laughed at our failures, mostly mine, this year, admittedly. But I can't tell you the number of nights that we stood across from each other, looking over the fence and talking. And it soon went past gardening, and you start talking about other aspects of your life, but it starts the conversation. It is a set of values that comes with the effort to learn about how to grow your own food, about what you're putting into your body, about how you're communicating with your local community and supporting that network. It's a set of core values that you share about community, about agriculture and ethics and contribution and sustainability, health, all these things you start to realize that you're falling in line with. And that conversation starts over a fence, talking about whether your squash seeds germinated and whether the snails ate them, or are the whiteflies bothering your this and that too, or is it just me? What am I doing wrong? And you have that companionship around those topics, and that was something that I really came to value so deeply and was so grateful that I had during this year. And my depression garden gave me that. My goal for next year is not to call it my depression garden. I'm hoping to move past that a little bit. But I'm excited that I haven't given up. I'm excited that I'm still excited and curious. If you battle depression and anxiety, it's easy to follow the pattern of lacking follow through. I am very much a victim to this. And I'm excited that I still care, because it's something that's important to care about, something that I've developed a passion for, that I want to teach to others, that I want to share with others, that I want to increase and expand and do better and take the lessons that I've learned from the last year and continue to grow, to acknowledge failure as a lesson, to steal the words of Jess from Roots and Refuge Farm and acknowledge that our waiting room is our classroom, that I can learn to dehydrate, and I have this year, and that I get to continue to experiment with that I have cabbage in the fridge in a fermenting kit that is going to be sauerkraut when I can get my mind in the right place. But there's all these baby steps that every week, every month, every season I can choose to take, and I look forward to taking them one step at a time and expanding those skills. So when one day, if I have a piece of land, or if I have half an acre like I have now, not even half an acre, like a quarter of an acre like I have now, there is so much bounty and possibility in even that space. And I look forward to continue trying to obtain the most out of any space, out of any opportunity, learning to have faith that things will continue to grow and move forward, whether it's food or in my career, my personal life. Things continue to grow when we nourish them, when we cultivate them, and when we keep being curious about them, when we acknowledge that our failures are opportunities to do differently next time, and to not punish ourselves for that, to acknowledge that it's all part of the process. And that's beautiful. And I am so grateful for that. So thank you for listening to my rant about my depression garden. I'm hoping that next season is going to be even more bountiful, full of even more failures, so that I can learn even more, take a little bit more risk, see a little bit more of the beauty, and just be glad that I'm here. So thank you. And I hope along the way I can teach you something, or at least maybe make you laugh. But thank you for joining the journey with me. I appreciate you. I appreciate your time and your willingness to listen and to maybe try some of it for yourself. Even if you're not ready to jump in the deep end, you're ready to try something. Whether it's herbs on the window, or drawing out your first plan for your first raised bed, or you're growing in a couple container gardens on your balcony, it doesn't matter. Grow one thing. Try one new skill. It'll give you something that'll last you a long time. These lessons don't go away. They're not ephemeral. They stick with us, and they're things that we can use for the rest of our life. And I think that is really, really powerful. So thank you so much, and welcome to my channel.